Types of editing for film and television. There are two types basically, continuity editing and non-continuity editing. We'll have a look at continuity editing first. Basically, it is a narrative-based form of editing that the filmmaker uses whereby they combine individual shots to tell a story. Everything sort of flows from one to the other, so you get this fluency between the previous shot and the next shot. It all adds up to creating a story. All films use this, and it's one of the basic forms of editing. Non-continuity editing is whereby the fluency is broken. One shot doesn't really lead into another shot. A typical example of this is a montage or a flashback. A montage of shots perhaps whereby they're showing a hero who previously did some heroic actions, and they go and show these a montage of these actions that he's taken. In a war film, it could be a series of different explosions happening in different places. A drama, it could be a montage of shots showing the villain and what they did in the previous, shall we say, months, whereby they rob banks or something like that. When it comes to flashbacks, you all know what a flashback is. Perhaps a person is thinking about what they did the week before, or perhaps the editor and the director has put in a flashback to help tell the story or bring the story back up to where it is at that precise moment in time. In other words, some films, what they do is they will start almost at the end, and then they go backwards in terms of how did they get to that ending. So that is non-continuity editing. Another typical example of non-continuity editing is what you see in terms of promotional videos, trailers. Film trailers is all about non-continuity editing. Each clip that you see, although there is a storyline to it, a narrative to it, they don't match up and they don't reveal the whole story to the audience. That's a typical example of non-continuity editing. So think about continuity as telling a story and non-continuity as breaking up that story. Purposes of editing for film and television. We're looking at the first one, which is all about manipulating time, which includes the speed up, slow down, compress time, stretch time. Now, manipulating time is one of the biggest parts of film editing, or even editing for drama on television or anything like that. Typically including speed up. Now, you've got to think about the fact that sometimes this is not about speeding up that piece of footage. This is about pace in terms of editing. Now, pace is very important in editing, and speeding up that and slowing down that and compressing time, they're all interactive with each other, and stretching time as well. Got to remember that if you was to show a scene and that scene was produced and edited in real time, then it's probably likely that you're not going to get enough time in the film. Because sometimes if you imagine it, two people talking together, they could be talking together for maybe an hour. Well, you obviously can't have that in film. So what they will do is they will compress that time in terms of editing and the dialogue of those two people. Speeding it up means they will also speed up that piece of dialogue by using short sentences which are positive and which the audience understands that is going to lead on to another part of the story. This is typical in terms of action films, where the pace of an action film is fast, it's furious, it's really, it rushes through and it compresses time massively. Whereas something in a slow pace, shall we say a crime drama, then you will find that the pace is slower. It has its moments, car chases, things like that, but it slows up that pace where there's dialogue because it wants to show how perhaps the detectives are working, what they're working on and how they're actually doing it. Again, slowing down, speeding up, slowing down. Stretching time is obviously all about exactly what it means. It stretches that time. A typical example, I believe, is that TV series 24 hours, is it, or 24? I can't remember the name of it. But that stretches time. That allows for time to almost run normally. And you don't often get that, but it does happen in, especially in TV, more so than in film, really. Comedies, there are some comedies that will stretch time as well to show a certain aspect of reality. So this is manipulating time, which is what editing and editors do all the time. Flashbacks, flash forwards, flash backwards to fit a specified running time is an example. So if you're, shall we say, speeding up and compressing time, then the flashback is going to help to do that, because actually it then starts to explain to the audience as how it came to that position in time when the audience first started watching that film. This is what flashbacks are. They're flashbacks of memory. They could be flashbacks as to how a specific series of actions that took place have ended up with what the audience have just started to see. Flashbacks can also are associated again with non-continuity editing. Remember that. Control the perception of space and create a logical and believable space between characters or objects not sharing the same shot. So you've got this, perhaps a typical example of this is a telephone conversation in a film. The perception of space. You have one person on the telephone, and then they show you the other person on the telephone, and it cuts backwards and forwards to this telephone conversation happening between two people. This is the perception of space. The audience knows that they are both speaking to each other, and the space is believable because the audience associates that space with a telephone conversation. Objects not sharing the same shot. This could be something along the lines of perhaps in a hero film, i.e. Batman or Superman or the Avengers, whereby a rocket is actually shooting, shall we say, from a spaceship, and the heroes see this rocket coming, and it cuts between the rocket and the heroes, the rocket and the heroes, the rocket and the heroes, or shall we say the missile, and it's coming closer and closer and closer, and suddenly you see the heroes take off and they grab hold of that rocket, and that's where the space between this missile rocket and the hero actually meets. And this is the control of that perception of space, the distance as well. Controlling rhythm and pace to control the flow of production. Again, we're looking back at the rhythm and pace in terms of, shall we say, a drama whereby there's a car chase and this is all happening, and then suddenly it cuts to the control room of a police station or an area that's controlling the cars, and it's slower. Then it speeds up again as it gets to that car chase. This is about controlling the rhythm of pace, the control and flow of the production. Now, you've got to look into these purposes of editing very carefully, because when it comes to your fiction film, you've got to be seriously thinking about how you're going to control and manipulate this time and space. And manipulating time is of great importance, because remember, first thing is, no film is shot in the sequence that you see on the screen. A lot of film editors, a lot of film directors tend to shoot the ending first, and when they do that, they could also shoot a number of editings. In a typical example was in Lethal Weapon, whereby they shot two or three, I think it was 3 different endings. One ending had one of the heroes dying at the end of the film, which when they played it to an audience, the audience hated it because they didn't want the hero to die. When they actually changed that ending to where the hero lived, the audience was sort of had mixed feelings about how it should end in terms of the heroes. But then they showed the third type of ending where one of the heroes actually got pretty poorly wounded, but still survived. And the audience liked that because it enhanced the hero. Again, this is all about manipulation and controlling rhythm and pace. Something that you need to think about, and when it comes to researching this, you need to research all aspects of this heading. Functions of editing for film and television. Create narrative. Now, a storyline needs to be motivated. Each clip leading on to the next clip needs to have some form of motivation for moving on from one clip to another. And this is obviously continuity editing as well. And that motivation needs to come from each of the previous clips. It's really motivated editing, I suppose, to a point, as it says here. It also helps to develop the drama. And this is all part of, as well as providing and withholding information. Now, some aspects of editing will provide the audience with information that the director feels they need to know at that precise moment in time. This could be perhaps whereby a hero is reading a text on a phone and suddenly it cuts to that text on the phone. So the director wants you, the audience, to see what that hero has actually got in terms of that text, the content of that text. When it comes to withholding information, then that's all about playing on the audience's mind. In other words, they sort of inject the audience, if you want to put it this way, with a certain amount of information, but they withhold a large block of that because it's not relevant at that time in the film. However, it does become relevant as the film progresses. And the information that they're withholding, the director is withholding from the audience, is built up as the film goes on. And I hope you can understand the way I'm putting that. This is development within the drama as well, providing and withholding information. It's a need-to-know basis. At that point in time of the film, you don't need to know as an audience all the information, because it would become information overload, if you like, and suddenly you'll probably find you'll lose track of the actual storyline. So the director and the editor, using editing techniques, will build on each aspect of the storyline, the narrative, allowing the audience to build up their understanding of what is happening and how it is happening. Create continuity between shots, obviously continuity editing, following the action. Now, a continuity error, as it's well known in film terms, is where something simple happens where one shot does not flow into the other one. For example, if you're doing an interview and somebody's put a pair of glasses on the table, taken the pair of glasses off, put them on the table, and suddenly these glasses disappear. Now, a fantastic example, oh, there goes my phone. A fantastic example of this break in continuity editing you will find on YouTube. If you watch a vlog, can be any vlog really, but if you watch a vlog and suddenly you'll see the film jump. Now, a lot of vloggers on YouTube vloggers, they will use this technique whereby they will cut. If they keep saying what they will do is they will cut that out. So you will see this jump, and this is known as a jump cut. It's the continuity has gone in terms of the way the film flows. I saw a typical example yesterday when I was watching a vlogger on YouTube, and they had their dog with them, and they were talking, and within a split second the dog disappeared. It was quite funny, really. The dog disappeared. And they were still talking about it, almost exactly the same as what they were talking about when the dog was there. So you get this break, and this is all about continuity editing. You need to avoid these jump cuts because it can become a disturbance within the audience's mind when they're actually watching that film. Changing time frame, including use of flashbacks. Well, obviously changing a time frame can have something to do with perhaps a typical example. Excuse me. A typical example is the beginning of Saving Private Ryan. Now, when you come to the beginning, you will see a graveyard, and it's modern day, and a person, an old man, is walking towards this graveyard, and he stops at a series of graves, and then suddenly you're back in the Second World War. And this is about the time frame. You start off with the current time frame, and then it goes back all those years to the Second World War, and it's almost like a flashback, but it's actually the main part of the film. In fact, the whole film really, because at the end of that film it then goes back to that same graveyard, and you also then, the audience, begins to understand who that person is. And because at the beginning it doesn't explain to you who this old man is. But of course, at the end of the film, and you see what happens throughout the whole film, and then it comes back to that graveyard, you then begin to understand, as the audience does, who this person is. And I'm not going to tell you because you may not have watched the film. Create audience reaction and engage the viewer. Creating suspense, creating pace. Drama, a thriller. That's famous for creating suspense through a slow pace. Also, in action films, they create suspense, and this suspense can be created through the use of a soundtrack. Especially in horror films, you get these amazing soundtracks which, shall we say, envelope the whole scene in a suspenseful sort of feeling that the audience then receives from the way they've edited it, and the music itself. It creates suspense, and this suspense in the film Psycho. In the film Psycho, you see this suspense created through the way they filmed it and the editing, the famous shower scene in Psycho. And if you watch this famous shower scene in Psycho, you will see how the suspense is really, really building up as the woman in the shower is showering away, and suddenly the music starts to turn and this shadow starts to come up behind her. And then suddenly the music strikes out with this famous sound that is well known in the film industry, and the knife comes down. Have a watch of it. It only lasts a few seconds, so watch that and see. Pace, creating pace is important. It's going to be important to you in your film as well. Do you want a nice slow pace and then speed it up towards the end, towards where the action takes place? Or do you want a very fast-paced action throughout your film? Some hero films, you find the pace changes throughout. You get discussions in the Avengers films whereby they have this sort of meeting and everything calms down. I believe in one of the Avengers films they go to one of the guys' houses and they meet his wife and children, and there's all this nice slow pace I should say, time period where everything is relaxed and nobody's doing anything, and then suddenly it bursts out and they all disappear and they all go after the villains. Create meaning, juxtaposing elements within editing. Create empathy with a character. Editors and directors are very clever at getting the audience to have empathy for the character, with the character. Even though they may be a villain, they'll get the audience to start feeling sorry for this villain, because this villain is shall we say, being treated very, very badly. Now, there are many films of which at this precise moment in time my mind's gone blank with regards to an example, but I'm sure you'll find them out there, whereby the editor through the way they've edited, allows the audience to feel sorry for this character, to like this character, to love this character, whether they're hero or villain, it doesn't matter. Creating bias in fiction or documentary editing. Well, creating bias in documentary editing is all about getting the audience to support what is being said and what is being shown in the documentary. And this comes up quite often. Creating an unbiased documentary allows the audience to judge for themselves who is correct and who is not correct, whereby a biased documentary doesn't give the audience that option. And the same with creating bias in fiction. You don't get that option. In a biased fiction, the villain is a villain. End of story. No way, no two ways about it. They are a villain. The hero is the hero. But an unbiased fiction is whereby the audience is given this option of allowing themselves shall we say, the pleasure of judging who is going to be good and who is going to be bad. And sometimes by the end of the film, they'll have changed their mind, especially if the hero is not quite the hero he's made out to be. So you need to research all these, think about the create meaning, and then all these elements that creates meaning, create audience reaction, create continuity, and create narrative. Have a look at them all. Further your knowledge, your understanding of these through research. You've got the time now, and write about these functions of editing for film and television. Use and compare examples, because if you do this, then obviously the grade is going to be much better, because using different examples and comparing different examples allows the assessor, in this case myself and Mr. Patworth, to see that you understand what you are talking about and how you are talking it and how you are presenting it. And also evidence. If you criticize something, always evidence that criticism. Editing techniques for film and television. Now, some of these subheadings you've already covered for Unit 20, and I can get you to refer back to Unit 20 and your work there with regards to having a look to see what you've written about these following subheadings: establishing shots, cutaways and cut-ins, shot reverse shot, 180-degree rule, eyeline matching, and then we'll go down to the bottom where freeze frame, slow motion, split screen, wipes, dissolves, fades, up and down to black and white. So these you will have covered in Unit 20 and are pretty much sort of self-explanatory. But the first one we're going to look at here is the 30-degree rule. Now, the 30-degree rule is all about the movement of the camera. Basically, when it comes to shooting, what directors will tend to do is not move the camera more than a 30 degrees, left or right, up or down. That way, everything is kept within, shall we say, the context of the camera lens and how this camera is operating. This 30-degree rule obviously is not a hard and fast rule, but is, however, used more often than not in films. So it's about the movement of the camera. Now we have a look at jump cutting. Well, avoiding accidental jump cuts and creating purposeful ones. Two things here. One is avoid the jump cut. Make sure that one clip flows into another clip seamlessly. This is important, otherwise the audience is going to become confused. If you want to create a jump cut, then it's got to have meaning. It's got to have a purpose within that scene, within that part of the storyline. Generally, a lot of directors will avoid the jump cut, simple and fast. There are one or two that will show the jump cut, and you've really got to be able to think about how that jump cut is going to be covered and what meaning it really has. Now we move on to a little bit of theory here, which is Let's have a look. Oh, we'll have a look at match cuts. Matching cuts. Always cut on action. It's good to cut on action. The last thing people want is to watch a movie where the actor is standing still and then suddenly starts to move. Now, if this is part of the scene, fair enough. But generally, it would have been better to cut that person while they're moving. That way, there's a fluency within the movement and the pace of the film. A graphic match basically means that if there's a background, then it's got to show that background in the next clip with regards to what that storyline is trying to show. Let's have a look. Seamless editing, we know all about that. Montage. Eisenstein. Now, Eisenstein was a famous Russian director editor, and they actually created a series of films, shall we say.
Could you try again?
I don't know what Siri's up to there, but it seems to have just come on its own. His most famous film, and probably one of the world's most famous films in terms of this period of time, was in 1925, titled The Battleship Potemkin. All about Russian Revolution, etc. And he was famous in this for creating a montage of images. And these images really worked together. They created a story within themselves. And this is what Eisenstein, he was basically known as the father of montage. And his exact name was Sergei Eisenstein. You'll be able to look at what happens and how he's working here through the link that I have placed on the left there, as you can see. Juxtaposing or juxtaposition, example, the Kuleshov effect. Again, another Russian film director who used and brought about this effect, which is extremely important when it comes to visual storytelling. It's all about meaning and manipulating space and time. For example, a typical example that you'll see here on the link I've given you on the left is you will look at, there will be a scene, shall we say, of two boys playing football on a beach. This isn't my example anyway. Two boys playing football on a sandy beach, and it cuts to a man in his late 50s looking at these two boys, and he scowls. He looks angry. And then it cuts back to these two boys. What meaning can you derive from watching these two boys play football on the beach and then cutting back to this person, this aged person, this middle-aged person, scowling and looking angry? What would you derive from that scene? How would you interpret why that man is looking angry? Is he angry because the two boys are playing on the beach? Is he angry because they're not playing football correctly, or they're poor footballers? Is he angry because they're perhaps playing near people and they're kicking sand about? Is he angry because there's a sign somewhere that says no football games or no ball games? There's so many different meanings, so many different juxtaposing of these images, and you've really got to think about how these images connect and the way they connect. This is the Kuleshov effect. The next one is D.W. Griffith. D.W. Griffith, which is famous basically for cross-cutting to combine separate scenes that occur simultaneously into a single scene. For example, he was an American director and he pioneered the feature-length movie. And he was the one that created or helped to create this cross-cutting to combine separate scenes that occur simultaneously. In other words, at the same time as shall we say, a car chase is going on, and it cuts to perhaps a person walking across the road. And at the same time as this car chase is going on, it cuts back to this person walking across the road, and it gets closer and closer and closer until eventually this person gets hit by the car. I'm just trying to think of an example which doesn't come to mind at the moment, but you imagine that you're building up the tension and this person is walking down the road and they are a private investigator. Let's say this private investigator is walking along this pavement and he wants to cross the road because he sees somebody that he needs to speak to seriously. So he's walking down the road and walking down the pavement and he goes to cross the road, and at the same time you've got these other two gangsters who are friends of this person across the road that the investigator wants to speak to, and they're driving down and they're slowly following this person walking down the road, down the pavement. As this person crosses the road, the music's building up, the tension builds up. You see a shot of the foot of the driver of the car. He hits it hard. It then cuts to a scene of the car racing towards this person crossing the road, this private detective. The private detective looks up in horror and shock as the car goes bang and hits him. Cross-cutting to combine separate scenes that occur simultaneously. Good example there. Parallel editing to edit together separate scenes that may or may not share the same time frame, to draw parallels between them and thereby create meaning. Parallel editing to edit together separate scenes that may or may not share the same time frame. This could be along the lines of perhaps a flashback where something is happening in the future which actually also happened in the past. So you've got this sort of parallel time frame which allows the audience to start to understand a deeper meaning towards the storyline and what is actually happening. Draw parallels with them. For example, this could be something a father did in the police force, and in modern day time the son in the police force is doing exactly the same thing, or creating or producing exactly the same actions and reactions. Thereby it creates a meaning and a link to what is actually possibly going to happen in the storyline. So there we have it in terms of what we need to be able to understand these editing techniques. Eisenstein, Kuleshov and D.W. Griffith. You need to look at these theories. You need to look at how and why they created this. Battleship Potemkin, of course, by Eisenstein, I think is the pronunciation, is very famous and always comes up when film theory is being actually discussed and debated. So look at these. Study them, watch the videos, think about their meaning, because they will have some sort of effect on you and your fictional film that you're going to produce.